Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And of course, our millennials, Christopher Hopkins, over here, our producer. He's to my right. I'm not sure if he's in the camera, but we have a special guest today, and it's Mark Meckler, the president and founder of Convention of States. Welcome. We're honored to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So I want everybody to know, Mark told me that I can't give him an elaborate introduction, so I'm not going to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
But I am going to say this. Before we talk about Convention of States, my understanding is that you are the founder of the Tea Party, and that's kind of how things started with you. I don't want to start there. What is the Tea Party? When was it founded? Why was it founded?
I want to back up even a little bit before that, because I hear that all the time. People are like, oh, you're one of the founders of the Tea Party. And I think that overcredits me. And I say that because the Tea Party movement came out of the hearts and minds of the American people. I think God had a hand in it. This is back in 2009. People were really frustrated with the Bush administration. If you're a conservative like me, I mean, I lost my mind. President Bush, I remember, said, I'm abandoning free market principles to save the free market. I thought, man, is this Alice in Wonderland? Who is this guy? That's not the guy that I voted for. That's not conservative principles. So we were teed up for the Tea Party movement, so to speak, before Barack Obama became president. A lot of people say it was a reaction to Barack Obama. That's not true. Really, it was a reaction to Republicans who were not acting like Republicans. We were really frustrated. I know just as a citizen, I was frustrated, not engaged. So when the Tea Party movement starts to break loose, I think the credit that I'll take is it's kind of like if you see a surfer surf the perfect wave and you come out and you go, nice wave, dude. I didn't make the wave. Like I was, I guess, bold enough to paddle out on my surfboard and ride it. And that's, I would say, was my role. And we obviously formed up a big organization, gave it a place to reside. But the Tea Party movement, again, was in the hearts and minds of the American people. And it really started because people were frustrated with the economic policies. There were all the big bailouts. A lot of folks won't remember that, but we were spending billions and billions of dollars bailing out people who made bad decisions.
And this was the Great Recession.
Right.
It had started, so the government was like, we're going to just bail people out regardless of their decisions. And that's one of the reasons.
And I think it's really important that people understand what that means, like what a bailout really is. What it means is you're going to take my money, who I'm not getting a bailout. I didn't make bad decisions. I made good decisions, right? I was conservative financially. I didn't need a bailout. I wasn't one of those businesses or individuals. And you're going to take my money and you're going to give it to people who made bad decisions. And not just my money, because honestly, I'm an upper middle class guy, but what about just Joe working man that's at the bottom of the middle class or in the lower classes? Or what about, people in the inner cities that are really struggling to make it? You're taking their money and giving it to fat cats on Wall Street and, big real estate company, bailing them out. And so it was pretty outrageous what was going on. Then you get the election of Barack Obama, who obviously as a conservative, I did not support. But I have to say, and this is sort of a little bit of a sideline, but I think it's an important historical sideline, an incredible watershed moment in American history, right? I didn't support him politically. We're the only majority white country in the history of the world ever to elect a black president. I think it was supposed to, it could have closed the door and on some bad era in race relations and really opened the door to a new era. Unfortunately, Barack Obama chose not to do that. And he exacerbated, he caused all kinds of race problems. More importantly, politically, he just continued what Bush did. He was supposed to be something so radically different, right? And he was elected. He had a mandate. That was truly a mandate election.
Absolutely.
The majority of white people voted for him twice, right? And he comes in.
By the way, that's something that I think the average American doesn't understand, that Barack Obama got blue-collar white voters in the Midwest to vote for him.
Which is incredible, right? Bad politically speaking, in my opinion, but from a societal perspective, absolutely incredible. It shows this narrative of where this intrinsically racist country just blows it out of the water. They ignore that. But so he comes in, and here's what blew my mind, and I think a lot of people, he said he was going to be entirely different. No bankers in the White House, no lobbyists in the White House. Well, that lasted about 5 minutes. Literally no exaggeration. Some of the first people appointed from the banking industry, different banks, different bankers, different lobbyists, but same thing. And then he immediately starts breaking other promises. I'll give you an example. And again, policies I don't support. First thing was, he said, number one, very first thing I do when I sit down, I'm going to sign an executive order getting rid of don't ask, don't tell. So he made a promise to the gay community and they rallied around him based on this promise. And he immediately breaches that promise. Most people don't remember this history. He finally does repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell late in his second term, right? And so I look at this and I think, wow, we had this mandate election. Everything's going to change. I'm not necessarily going to like the way it's going to change, but everything. And then, frankly, not that much changed.
No.
Right? And not from a political policy perspective. It was like Bush on steroids. And so that's what sets up, I think, the moment for the Tea Party movement. Because I know, speaking for myself as a grassroots guy, I'm thinking, I don't get it. My guys weren't doing what I wanted. The other side, quote unquote, they elect somebody, he's not doing what they want. What the hell is Washington, D.C. doing? And the answer was nothing that the American people want.
So you have all these people in the United States who are saying, the government isn't listening to us because we work hard, we go to work every day, we save, we live within our means. The government isn't doing any of those things. It's certainly not living within its means. Both parties seem to be a uniparty. How did the individuals who started talking to one another and the Tea Party, how do you communicate with all these millions, literally millions of people to become an organization, a movement? Because all I remember is people protesting in Washington, D.C. and leaving it as clean as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing. That's what I remember, that visual. But this is before the age of true technology. How do you communicate?
So there's a moment before that. And, it's funny, having been there, most people miss that part of the history because everything happens overnight and instantaneously, except for it doesn't, right? There's always a backstory. So on February 20th of 2009, Rick Santelli, who's a reporter on CNBC from the Chicago Mercantile, is a business reporter. He does a rant from the floor of the Merc.
I remember that.
Okay, so this goes viral. And the rant basically says that all these bailouts, they're un-American. Like, if we're going to spend X billions, why don't we just spend trillions if that's what makes everybody rich? And he's being sarcastic. The hosts in New York, are disrespecting him and mocking him. The traders on the floor are supporting him. This moment goes viral, and it goes viral because Rush Limbaugh picks it up and some others pick it up and they start playing this clip. And he calls for a tea party on the shores of Lake Michigan on July 4th. And I don't think he intends to do it. Like, it's just a rant. And Santelli's known for these rants.
Of course.
He says he's going to bring all productive Americans together on the shore of the lake there, and they're going to do this big Tea Party thing. Meanwhile, Twitter is new at the time. It's hard to remember that way back when. Twitter's free back then. It's not censorious. And there's a hashtag, which is TCOT, which stands for Top Conservatives on Twitter. And all it was really was a ranking engine based on popularity for conservatives. So we would just look who had the most followers, right? Mm-hmm. And on that hashtag, somebody said, hey, this thing is going off and we should do something with this. Let's do a conference call. It was actually a guy by the name of Michael Patrick Leahy from Virginia had the original idea. And so there was a conference call that was set up on freeconferencecall.com, a service a lot of us still use. I think 14 people showed up on that conference call. I was not among them. And they said, this thing's happening. Let's do something with it. And they said, let's hold a tea party. But we shouldn't wait until July 4th. We could lose momentum by then. Who knows? Let's do it now. So they set it for a week later, February 27th of 2009. I heard about it a couple of days later. One of my friends sent me a link to the clip and said, do you know about this? I was living in California at the time. I didn't. I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. I agree with this. This clip inspires me, right? You probably saw it.
Absolutely. I was very inspired by that.
Right.
Yeah.
So
he was saying what I was thinking, but no one else was.
So he was saying what millions of us were thinking, right? This is what I mean. It existed in the hearts and minds of the American people. So I, as any longtime married guy did, I went to my wife and said, hey, I want to hold a protest. What do you think of that idea? I want to do one of these Tea Party things. And she said, yeah, let's do it. She's from Boston originally. She's like, Tea Party, we got that. That's in my blood, right? That's my family history. So we hold a protest. I did February 27th of 2009 in Sacramento, California. And about 150 people.
Is that where you lived at the time?
Yeah, I was in Grass Valley, which is a little foothills town.
Okay.
A beautiful area, kind of like where we are right now today. And drove an hour down to the Capitol and held a protest and had a blast. It was incredible. People were driving by honking and waving. And, And to me, I thought, wow, there's 149 other people that aren't crazy in California that I can now relate to. These are all my new friends. So that happens. And when I get home, we drive up the hill, we're jacked up. I don't protest. I'm a conservative. I've never done that before. So you get up, get home, and I start calling other people that I can find with Facebook pages that did this in California. Mm-hmm. And it turns out there were actually 35 of these protests around the country. About 39,000 people attended these protests all around the country.
Wow.
1 week notice, right? Organized on Facebook, no money. I start calling around in California, and just all I want to do is network. And I'm like, hey, Mark, I saw you did one of these in San Jose. How was it? What'd you do? What'd you learn? Was it fun? Well, suddenly that made me inexplicably the California Tea Party organizer. And the media got a hold of that. And it happened because...
biggest state in the country.
Yeah. And suddenly I organized this stuff, which I had nothing to do with organizing anything except for Sacramento. This is why when I say people say I founded the Tea Party, it's kind of funny because it's fake media, basically. And what happened was they were just calling other people and they were saying, well, I don't know who really organized all this, but this guy, Mark Meckler, called us, right? So they hear my name from a few different people. They assume I'm the organizer. So that happens, and then I start calling around to other people in the country that did it. Ultimately, that brings me to the center of a group of people who decide we should do this again. Like, it worked. It was pretty exciting. People are jacked up all over the country. The momentum seems to be there. We shouldn't let this die. And so we plan another Tea Party protest. This is the one most people know about, April 15th, tax day, 2009. And we have a huge goal. We think if there were 35 of these previously, now we have like 6 weeks to do it. Maybe we could get 70. Maybe outrageous, we get 100.
How did you let people know about it? Nationwide?
Just Facebook. Literally just Facebook. Okay, so I didn't know anything about Facebook at the time. I started to learn about Facebook. So I started to go to other political
So you didn't have
groups.
Facebook fact checkers back then?
Yeah, no, there wasn't. The speech police were not on Facebook back then. They wouldn't have allowed this today, right? So
no, they wouldn't.
So we start posting this stuff, and eventually Fox News gets wind of it. And this is when it really goes viral. And in my own office, again, one of these untold stories, there is a message that comes in on our phone. My wife's checking our messages. I have a home office. I'm a lawyer, but I work from home at the time. And it's from Neil Cavuto. Somebody claims to be Neil Cavuto's producer, right? And I just think it's hilarious. Like, this is a joke, right? Why would Neil Cavuto's producer call my home office? Luckily, my wife smells that it's real. She calls him back. It is. He asks if he can come to Sacramento and cover the protest on April 15th. Meanwhile, Fox is all over it nationwide. Greta Van Susteren says D.C. You've got Hannity calls our Atlanta organizers and says he wants to be in Atlanta.
Oh my gosh.
We've got Glenn Beck, who is on Fox at the time, says he wants to do the Alamo. Somehow that seems appropriate for Glenn Beck. I don't know, like the Last Stand kind of a guy, right? And now it explodes because now Fox is starting to talk about there's a growing movement. There's this Tea Party thing.
Yeah, national news now.
National news now. And so we have a little, very simple WordPress website set up. And what we're telling people is if you're going to have one of these on April 15th, just list them and we'll put them on this website. We're so low budget and we have so little idea what we're doing. Literally, there's no form that you can then populate, which will go on the website. It's submit them to us and we'll type them into the website, right? We're so low budget and ignorant. And, now everybody will tell you this was all AstroTurf and it was funded by the Koch. That's so untrue. I put my home phone number on this website. This is how stupid we were. As it started to grow, I'm getting calls from India and Japan from the media in the middle of the night because they see all this stuff going on. It was just crazy. So ultimately, 850 of these around the country when we finally shut down registration 2 days before the event. And it's flipped my personal life upside down. I have to shut down my legal practice. I don't have time. I end up doing all this media stuff. As a lawyer, I'm trying to help all these people. People are saying, oh, my township says they won't let me hold this event. And so I'm having to call county lawyers, township lawyers all over the country telling me, yeah, well, I'm going to sue you if you don't give these people a permit. So
local governments were trying to censor
absolutely
the Tea Party.
Absolutely.
And this is in 09.
09. Because they saw it as a conservative Republican thing. So you get into blue states, especially, they didn't want to allow this to happen. So we get ultimately 850 of these. I'm in Sacramento. And I remember the night before walking out in front of the Capitol, we're on the steps of the Capitol. By now, thank God, I realized what's going on. The local taxpayer organization in Sacramento's helped us out. They paid for the staging. There's a huge sound system. There's a jumbotron. Like, this is crazy, right? This is not in my wildest imagination. I remember standing on the stage the night before. Highway Patrol is there guarding all the equipment and everything, thinking, man, I hope somebody shows up. Because it's not like we're selling tickets. I have no idea. Seems like it's going to be big. We're prepared for a lot of people. So the next day, the event takes place. Over 20,000 people show up. It's the biggest protest in the state capitol's history. It's shut down for blocks around the Capitol. They have to create a security corridor. And I'm, meanwhile, on a text thread with all the organizers, the main organizers all over the country. Atlanta is even bigger. It's probably 25, 26,000.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's huge. DC, I think, was 8,000 or 9,000. Crazy all over the country. We all hold our events, goes swimmingly. And like you said, weirdly, at the end of the event, there's not a gum wrapper on there.
Like never.
Literally, I was at the state capitol grounds. They had these huge cleanup crews there. They had nothing to do. They literally emptied the trash cans. That's all they had to do.
Because these are people that love their country and respect the environment.
They're law-abiding citizens.
Yes.
Like, we don't dump trash everywhere. We don't trash stuff, right? So as we come out of that, a few of the group that helped organize this say, we got to go back to our lives. We got stuff to do. Me and a few others say, I can't stop. Something is going on. I feel compelled, an obligation to help foster this. We found Tea Party Patriots out of that. That goes on to grow into the largest Tea Party organization in the country. Ultimately, 23 million members, 3,200 chapters roughly around the country.
Totally organic. This was totally organic, which shows you the power of people when they are upset about something and motivated to change.
The amount of money spent, as far as I know, to promote the Tax Day Tea Party was zero. I mean, literally, there was no paid advertising. It was just, Fox covered it, to be fair. I'll tell you, this shows you how little, like, there was no money. I actually asked Fox. I didn't know anything about any of this, the media, anything. I said, we're going to have this huge event. Can you guys help pay for it? They're like, yeah, no, we're a news agency. Like, we're not promoting your event. I don't know. I don't know how these things work,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, so
We'll cover it, but we're not going to pay for it.
ultimately what happens is a lot of us who were in the middle of it were spending our own money. For my wife and I, it really actually took us to the edge of bankruptcy because I didn't know anything about running a nonprofit. I knew how to make money, but I didn't know how to ask people for money for nonprofit stuff. So I think that was true for a lot of people in the movement. We spent our own money. We shut down our businesses because we were too busy doing this stuff. Ultimately, I would say God stepped in. There's an incredible philanthropist by the name of Foster Friess, passed away last year, nationally known philanthropist, and he gave us our first big check to help the organization stay afloat. I was at an event in Washington, D.C. Somebody told me I needed to attend. We were on the main stage being interviewed about the Tea Party movement. Kind of old blue hair Republicans were like, what's going on? We don't understand this thing, right? It's completely organic. It's not them. So I got invited to, myself and my co-founder, Jenny Beth Martin, got invited to address the folks there. An organization called Council for National Policy. Came off the stage, this 6'3" guy in a white cowboy hat approached us and said, seems like you guys could use some help. Yes, sir. And he said, would it help if I gave you a $250,000 check? Yeah, the look on your face was the look on my face. Yeah, 2009. And of course, we're broke at the time. And I'd never had anybody offer us any money. And I looked at him. I'll never forget. I remember what I said. I said, am I supposed to say something other than yes? Because I feel like I just don't know what else to say. Yes, of course that would help us. So he kind of kept the lights on. That gave us time to really form up and start to do fundraising. Of course, goes on. In 2010, you see the largest turn in Congress from one party to another since 1938. The Tea Party wave enters Congress. And at that point, I believed almost like we were done. Like, they're going to listen to us. Obviously, we just elected this huge wave class. And unfortunately, that's not exactly what happened.
So all these new people got elected because of the Tea Party, and they didn't try to follow through with the wishes of the Tea Party, which were what?
It was actually pretty simple. It was fiscal responsibility.
Okay.
Kind of balance the budget, cut your spending, right? Live within your means. It was support free market capitalism, right? And it was fidelity to the Constitution, live by constitutional principles. And pretty much all of that went by the wayside almost immediately.
And that was 2010.
That's 2010. That class gets sworn in. We actually held a...
Now, just as an aside, interestingly enough, in 2010, I was inspired by the Tea Party, and I was inspired by the fact that I thought we were operating our country in an extra-constitutional manner, which is why I ran.
So that's when you first ran.
That's when I first ran.
See, and I love it.
So I was part of that. I was inspired by your
So
group.
you and I are part of the same wave, right? And I would say, you say you were inspired by that. I was inspired by the people like you that ran. I mean, that's what kept me going.
Thankless.
It's
truly thankless.
And
by the way, you talking about going to the edge of bankruptcy. While that didn't happen to us because you put everything on the line for this massive nationwide group, and I'm just talking about a little district in the state of Maryland, I will say this: if you do this job correctly, you get significantly poorer.
Oh,
if you do it, if you really care.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the exception, not the rule.
What's so interesting is when I came into politics as a grassroots guy, I hated every politician. I mean, that was just kind of the baseline. If you're going,
I still hate every politician.
Well, so that's if we're
ask Chris.
If we're grassroots folks, right? That's where we come from, right? All a bunch of scum. But here's what I found out from doing this now for however many years, 13 years. There are great people in the state legislatures. Like that's where American greatness is found. I'm so thankful for our state legislatures, frankly, even the bad ones, because I think oftentimes even the people who are opposite of my ideology, they're still going into the state legislature because they believe in what they believe in. They're coming in for the right.
And you're very close to the people.
Right. And it's like you said, it's not generally financially beneficial to be a state legislator.
Not in a state legislature. No.
And so what I learned is, wow, this is where American patriotism lives. This is what the founders intended. So it totally shifted my understanding of the personnel inside our government, not the structure. The structure's been broken because we put all the power in D.C. It should be with you guys in the state legislatures. Absolutely. But what motivated me, frankly, and what's motivated me ever since 2010 are people like you, that I travel around the country and I meet people like you everywhere.
No doubt.
In the state legislatures, they're now in Congress, they're lieutenant governors and governors that say, well, I came out of the Tea Party movement. I started at the same time as you. So we're just two sides of the same coin. I would argue you were just braver than me. Because, no. Seriously, you did the harder thing.
No, because
I
didn't put my entire life on hold and almost go bankrupt because I said I'm not going to do this career anymore because there's something greater than me. Because you weren't getting paid at all. At least when you run for office, you are at least receiving a paycheck if you are fortunate enough to get elected. At what point this is what I find interesting about your organization, and I don't know the truth, and that is. By your organization, I'm talking about the Tea Party. At what point did the federal government start really messing with you guys over tax status, over nonprofit tax status or tax exempt status?
So that starts in 2010. And what happens in 2010 is really post-election, all the groups are saying, well, what do we do now? So you've got, 3,200 chapters roughly across the country. And we're trying to figure out, well, they need money. They have to raise money. How do they do that? Like, what's the format? I don't know anything about nonprofits. Now I'm an expert in all that stuff because I've had to become.
I can imagine.
But imagine, you're running a tea party in your little township. Maybe it's costing you $1,500 a month. You're doing newspaper ads. Maybe you're paying for a local venue where you're having meetings. It's a lot of money. How do you raise money? Do people just give you a check? Well, now you're getting cash personally. That's income. Mm-hmm. And so we start figuring this out. We're telling people, really, you need to be a C3 or 501c3 or 501c4. These are charitable entity statuses, non-taxable statuses with the federal government. And so we start telling people what you need to do is apply to be one of those things. There's some legal nuance between the two we don't need to go into here. Okay. And what starts to happen is the normal turnaround time for that, 6 weeks to 12 weeks. What's happening is they're not hearing anything. 12 weeks, 36 weeks. Now we're into a half a year and we're into a year. And then all of a sudden they start getting hit with these huge requests saying, well, we want to know a lot more about you before we respond to your request for status. And they start getting these literal dossiers of questions. And the questions are unconstitutional. They're asking them, for example, tell us every book you've ever recommended at your Tea Party meeting. Yeah, we want to know what you're reading.
What?
Tell us what the prayers are.
This is the IRS asking
This is the IRS, yeah. To give us a list of...
Is this the lowest learner IRS?
This is the lowest learner IRS. She's the one that's in charge of the nonprofit designation center, which is out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And they put together what's called a BOLO, which is a be on the lookout list, right? And there's actually, I learned through litigation, there were over 1,000 of these lists promulgated. And so I have friends all over the country at this point in the Tea Party movement. They're getting these heinous requests, which saying basically, we're not going to give you your status until you give us copies of everything you've ever given out at a meeting, all the books you've ever read. What are your prayers? Any speech, we want a copy of any speech ever given. It was actually, this happened to one of my closest friends who'd become our local Tea Party organizer, classic grandma, Jeannie Rapini, organizing in our local small community. It took 3 bankers' boxes of documents to respond to what they wanted. And in fact, it also included a red, white, and blue Beanie Baby because they had given those out at one of the Tea Party meetings. And they said, you have to give us everything you've ever given. She originally, when she got the request, broke down crying, said, I can't do this. It's not possible. And I said, hey, whatever you want to do. And then she called me back the next day and said, that's what they want me to do. They want me to quit, and I'm not going to quit. So she did it. So that's what happens. It actually really starts to stifle political activity because people are scared, which was their intent, right? And one of the things that happens through that process is I get really frustrated because I'm watching all this stuff happen. And this goes on through the 2012 elections. It really slows the Tea Party movement down in the 2012 elections, which I think was the prime purpose of all of this.
And it would have swept out Barack Obama.
Correct.
And they knew this.
Yes.
They knew this.
That is correct. So I would estimate they probably stifled 60 to 70% of Tea Party activity of the local groups. Because if you're a local mom and pop and you get one of these, you're just...
So 60 to 70% of the Tea Party groups across the country were not able to actually fully operate because they couldn't raise money.
That's correct.
Legally, at least, because they did not receive tax-exempt status from the IRS.
That's correct.
And as such, they weren't able to raise money and organize and activate.
And on top of that, they're intimidated because they're being harassed by the IRS.
Oh, my gosh.
Right. So most people consider the IRS the scariest.
They can take everything
agency.
away from you
Correct.
if they want to.
So people realize, well, the IRS is now scrutinizing us. I'm not sure I want to be involved in that anymore. Not irrational. I get the fear. So around 2012, I left the Tea Party Patriots, the organization I founded. Mm-hmm. I left for 2 reasons, a few reasons. One is I left because I felt like it wasn't accomplishing anything. Like Congress had gone rogue on us. They'd gone back to doing what they always do. Most of the folks we had lost. So now, why was I doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Like I dedicated my life to this. I was traveling a lot. I was away from my family all the time.
Obama got back in.
Obama gets back in. I'm making way less money than I used to make as a lawyer. And I'm just thinking, I don't need this garbage. And so I'm about to leave politics. This is just an incredible blessing. A friend who had just become a friend and a donor out of Texas, a guy by the name of Tim Dunn, West Texas oil guy, kind of salt of the earth guy, came and said, you can't leave politics. Got to stay in. No, I said, no, I don't. He said, look, almost everybody who comes into politics and rises quickly, and I would agree with this, gets corrupted by rising quickly. I just think it's normal. I'm not even critical of its human nature, right? So suddenly you go from somebody like me, nobody knows me. I'd prefer it were that way, by the way. But then all of a sudden I'm on TV, I'm doing Fox News, everybody knows me. You go to DC and people want to meet with you. It could be heady stuff. And so what happens is I think people start to compromise their own values and principles because they like that, right? Mm-hmm. And they justify it. I'm not saying they're bad people. It's like, well, I can do more good if I'm here.
Of course.
And in order to be here, I have to compromise my principles, but that allows me to stay here and I'm better than. So I was not into that. I just thought, oh, hell no. I want to go back to riding horses and coaching my kids' soccer team. And Tim said, you didn't get corrupted, so let's figure out what to do. And I said, I don't know what to do. And he said, well, me either, but I'm willing to pay you to do it and to figure it out. And so it was kind of like we did this little negotiation.
That's a dream come true there.
The best job offer in history,
yes, exactly.
Right? Literally. And he just said, look, let's sit down and figure out what you need to be paid to make it so that you can do this, and then we'll figure out what to do. And really incredible. One of the biggest blessings in my life, this is a total side story, but the actual biggest blessing that comes out of this is at the time, I'm not a Christian, and I've been an atheist or an agnostic most of my life. I was raised a secular Jew. Tim ultimately is the guy that helps me find Jesus Christ. And so I get salvation out of all of this, which is the most important thing. Okay, yeah, I'm trying to save the country, but the Lord saved my soul. And so that's what comes out of this. So
Which brings more meaning to the cause.
I mean, now I understand why God brought me to the fight, right? It wasn't for that fight. First, it was for me and my salvation. Then it's like, okay, now I've saved you. Now I have stuff that I expect of you.
Exactly.
And so I am a very obedient servant because I know what I got out of the deal. It's more than I could ever repay. So the first thing that we do is we raise $1 million and we give that to the grassroots groups. Because when I was in the Tea Party movement, we were raising all this money and none of it was going to the grassroots. And I had a lot of fights with my board trying to get them to give money to the grassroots, just couldn't get it done. And so I raised $1 million, give it away to grassroots groups all around the country. The second thing we do is
By the way, that's the opposite of the way most groups work. Most groups that are national groups work so that the locals give money to the national. And that says a lot for you. You actually did it the opposite.
Yeah.
You were giving money back to the locals.
It wasn't happening when I was with Tea Party Patriots. That was one of my frustrations. I was fighting for that. And for a variety of reasons, I just couldn't make it happen. So once I was able to do that, yeah, that was satisfying. It was hard, by the way, because groups are scrapping for money and the ones that get more versus the ones that get less, they're mad at you. You know, this old saying, no good deed goes unpunished.
That's right.
This is like give away $1 million and get people really mad at you
still
for
mad,
it. Yes. Totally worth it anyway. And then all this IRS stuff is going on. And I'm talking to a bunch of the folks that I would refer to as TV lawyers. And I don't want to name names because there's a lot of them do a lot of good work, but they're not doing anything in regard to these groups being harassed. And I'm talking to them saying, somebody has to sue the IRS. This is infuriating. These are my friends. They're like my family. They're scared. They're being intimidated. And the TV lawyers who are making a big fuss about it on TV are like, well, we might, and we can't really tell you what we're doing. And finally, I just say, you know what? All right, screw it. I'm going to do it. And so I go to my board and to my friend Tim, like, this is super expensive. Suing the IRS is insane.
Yeah.
We need to sue the IRS. So we went out and we found a great class action counsel and a great attorney, but not in D.C., which is where all these other people were. We went to the middle of the country. Our attorneys were from Kansas City, former U.S. attorney, guy who knows the government, not scared of the government, by the name of Todd Graves, Eddie Grime, a couple of the best attorneys in America, in my opinion, not afraid to poke the federal government in the eye. And we filed in Cincinnati, which is where all these designations were being made. And I spent the next several years. I was not a plaintiff. We just raised the money. My friend Jenny, who I was telling you about, the grandma, she was the lead plaintiff of the class. We got a class certified. 4 years later, the IRS paid $3.7 million. I don't think it's near enough. Lois Lerner's not in jail. I'm not satisfied. But we're the only people I'm aware of that ever got a class action settlement out of the IRS.
It's a huge accomplishment.
So that's, it kind of shows my personality, which is, yes, that's impossible, but somebody needs to do it anyway, so we're just going to go do it.
Yeah,
so,
and it was the first time. The story that you're telling is about the IRS and your experience, your personal experience of the Tea Party organization with the IRS is the first time, and it was a real eye-opener for me, which means, and I do think that is for the country too, that our government has been weaponized. And I never really believed that our government could be weaponized because you're an American and you believe in your country.
Yes.
And when that happened, and I remember the lawsuit, and I remember how you guys prevailed, and I remember how upset I was and still am that Lois Lerner didn't go to jail and that others didn't as well.
Right.
Because she did not
Nobody
act alone.
did. Right.
Someone told her to do what she's doing.
Absolutely.
And we know it was someone in the White House, I'm sure. The thing is that's when I had that epiphany. We live in a country that has been weaponized and it's no longer ours.
Yes.
It no longer belongs to us.
Yes. And I felt exactly the same way. You hear about corruption, but then to be under the brunt of the federal government and the full force of the federal government. And there were people that took it much worse than me. There's a woman by the name of Catherine Engelbrecht, and she runs True the Vote, really great American patriot. Yeah. And they came after her. OSHA came after her. A whole bunch of other agencies came after her. So we saw the ugly underbelly of the federal government. And basically what you saw is it was like a caged animal, right? So we were attacking them. We were threatening to take away their power. So their thing was they were going to kill us. I mean, they were going to come after us and they were going to destroy us. There's a long tail to the Lois Lerner story, which is just about to wrap up, which is that whole lawsuit gets settled. But during the lawsuit, the plaintiffs were able to get Lois Lerner under oath about 8 hours of deposition testimony. She and Holly Paz, who was her number one assistant, and those depositions today are still under seal. Nobody's ever seen them, right?
What?
Because they claimed that if people saw them, that they would get death threats and people would be too mad. So imagine this standard. They're saying if you do something bad and you're a federal official, make sure it's so bad that people will want to give you death threats because then nobody gets to see what you did. That's the standard they're arguing for.
And they can't be unsealed by a president's executive order?
Well, no, they can't. It's the court has jurisdiction over that, right?
Jurisdiction.
And so when the lawsuit gets settled, that issue is still outstanding. So here we are. It's now, the lawsuit got settled, I want to say 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, something like that. Those are still sealed. We're still fighting that with the court.
What?
We finally went
up.
I
had no idea.
Yeah, we finally went up about 3 months ago on a writ of mandamus to the appellate court saying, make the court do something, because the lower court just refused to rule on it. It had been briefed, it had been argued. They just blew it off. And so we finally, I had to get our organization out to the point where I felt like it's worth spending another $50,000 to make this motion. We go to the higher court. As soon as we go to the higher court, the lower court finally said, okay, we'll rule on it. And they ruled that these things have to be unsealed. And the actual opinion is hilarious because the judge basically is saying in the opinion, I'm so annoyed that you're making me do this and it's terrible and bad and I'm such a good person. But I get it. I got to do it. So they will be unsealed here shortly. There's some things that have to be redacted, which I'm fine with. It's personal information of Lois Lerner's family and Holly Pond. I don't want that stuff in there. But I expect sometime in the next 60 to 90 days, those depositions, full transcripts, full audio, video, those will come out and we'll actually get to see what she did.
You got to promise me you're going to come back on Mark and the Millennials and talk about that when that happens.
So that's the long
really
tip.
Good.
But here's the important part about it. During the pendency of that litigation, at one point, the federal judge said to the DOJ attorneys, and this is on the record, she said, I'm not sure you guys remember that I was a federal prosecutor. Oh, yes, ma'am, we do. And she said, and what I learned is my job was to pursue justice. And that's what DOJ attorneys are supposed to do, government attorneys are supposed to do. And she said, it's my opinion you have no interest in the pursuit of justice. All you're trying to do is drag this thing out as long as you can so nobody cares about the results except for the plaintiffs. And so she's chastising them. And look, this is how it plays out. Here we are many years later. Most people aren't paying attention. Most people wouldn't pursue it this long.
That's true.
I'm doing it because we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. But here we are many years later. A lot of people won't even remember this happened when this information comes out.
I think that's true. Which is why it's so important to keep doing what you're doing. And believe me, you are doing God's work.
Well, so
I had no idea this was continuing.
Mark,
I had no idea.
We talk about the deep state now, right? All of us use that terminology. So we were interacting with the deep state back then. Now it's on the surface. Now we all know it. Back then, if you said deep state, people look like you're crazy.
Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, of course. Yeah. You are crazy. Yes.
Now it's just the real deal.
And
so
real.
This is where we first started seeing all of this stuff play out.
So how did that experience motivate you to take that next step in life where you are today?
So 2012, we do the raise the $1 million. We do the sue the IRS. And we're still trying to figure out how do we fix the country. We formed an organization called Citizens for Self-Governance. I actually think it's a terrible name, and we knew it was a terrible name at the time because nobody knows what that means. What is self-governance, right? And we debated it. We talked to PR people about it, and everybody agreed it's a terrible name, and it has to be the name. And we agreed it had to be the name because self-governance is the foundation of American civilization, right?
Yes.
We are, in its most simplistic terms, I call us a DIY society, right? We are pioneers by nature. We came across an ocean and came to this country and came to the wilderness and carved something out of the wilderness. What does it require? It requires your self-governing.
Yes.
Like you're responsible for yourself, your family, your church, your community, and then ultimately into your city, your county, your state, and the federal government. We are the sovereign citizens responsible for that. And we're looking at American society and saying, we've lost a lot of that. Like, what do we do when we need something fixed now? Oh, well, that's the government. We need a government program for that. I mean, we're seeing it right now with the school shooting issue. Oh, the government has to do something. Really? Is that really what it is? Or do communities have to do something? Do our families have to do something? Do our churches do it? And so we decided we had to restore self-governance. And that was the fundamental thing. So we did those projects I told you. And then I met a guy by the name of Mike Ferris. Tim Dunn introduced you to Mike Ferris. Mike is the founder of the homeschool movement in America. So if you homeschooled your kids, if you know people who homeschooled your kids, you owe a debt of gratitude to Mike. In the 1970s, homeschooling was illegal in one way or another in all 50 states. Most people don't know.
Really?
That. Yeah. Isn't that, it's shocking, isn't it? I had no idea. And so they would do it, in some ways they would just outright prohibit it, but in a lot of, they would do things like, oh yeah, you can homeschool your kids. You just have to be certified according to teaching standards in every subject matter area.
Yeah, which means you're not going to do it.
Which no parent, no teacher can do that.
No.
Right? No professional teacher. So they had ways of keeping people from doing it. So Ferris said, this is a fundamental right of parents to educate their kids how they want. He fought for it. So he gets homeschooling ultimately made legal in every state in America. He founds Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Amazingly, that's the pre-internet era. I don't even understand how they did that, right? There's no cell phones.
Exactly.
High tech is a fax machine, right? And so they organized this nationwide movement, get it done. So Ferris comes to me and he says, are you happy with what you've accomplished in politics? And I say, no, I'm miserable. I put my life on hold, did all this stuff, sacrificed all this stuff, as did millions of other people for nothing at this point, pretty much. And he said, because you're approaching the wrong problem. You think we have a personnel problem. So you're trying to change over the people in Washington, D.C., but what we have is a structure problem. We've broken the system. That's what he said. And he said, until you fix that, just look what you just did. You sent all these great people to Washington, D.C., and the system ate them and spit them out. And you got good people in and garbage out because your system's broken. He said, so you have to focus on fixing the system. Okay, I'm listening. I'm a business guy. That makes sense to me. And he said, what you need to do is use this Article 5 process in the Constitution to propose amendments to restrain the federal government. The federal government originally was formed with 17 enumerated powers in the Constitution. There's now, like 17 million powers that the federal government has. We've got to carve that back and shove it back in the constitutional box. And the founders gave us a method in Article 5 as people acting through our states to call a convention of states to propose these kinds of amendments.
Okay.
And I said, well, that makes sense. Can you really do that? Because I knew something about Article 5. I'd actually hosted a conference on it at Harvard Law School the year before. I just didn't think you could actually do it. It didn't make sense to me. He laid out a plan. He said, you need to go. It's our plan that we use now. You need a district captain in every district. Got to go get legislative sponsors. You need 100 people in every district. And like, okay, this makes sense to me. There's some structure. My board agreed to finance it. And we launched the Convention of States Project in August of 2013.
Wow.
With just a few of us. And Mike Ferris helped found it up. By the way, Mike Ferris also founded Patrick Henry College, a good Christian college in Purcellville, Virginia. So we get some of his students who are just graduating come to work for us. I mean, there's 6 or 7 of us start the thing. And I think it's, you can tell at points if you're paying attention when God intervenes, right? And you can call it coincidence if you want. I think it's providence. And the week that we launched the Convention of States Project, Mark Levin released the book Liberty Amendments. Same week. People think we did that together. And the truth is, I was friends with Mark from the Tea Party movement, but I had no idea he was writing this book. His books are embargoed until the day he launches them. He can't talk about them by contract. So
it does seem like that book was written literally for this organization.
Because I think literally it was, in the sense that God had a hand in it. There came a moment where Mark and I were talking. Mark and I always talk a lot. I knew he was writing a book because he's especially curmudgeon-y when he's writing a book. I love Mark, but he gets cranky because he does all his own work. No ghostwriters.
He's brilliant.
He's brilliant. I was on a panel with Hugh Hewitt in Tucson, Arizona, and Mark Skyped into the panel. I didn't know he was going to. He didn't know I was launching my project. I didn't know he was writing the book. And we each got to ask him a question from the dais, like we're sitting here today, right, in front of the microphones. And I said, Mark, I think we've lost the country. I think we need to use Article 5, call a convention, propose amendments, because I just don't think DC's paying attention to us. And Mark was literally stunned by the question. And Mark, Mark has words for everything.
Yes, he does.
A lot of them. And he just said, and he mumbled, literally, it's just like, he was stumped. And he finally said, I'm writing a book. I can't really talk about it, but yeah, I agree with you. And that's all he said. And I thought that's the weirdest Mark Levin answer in history. Just like I have my phone sitting here on vibrate right now, because we're on there. I had my phone sitting there on vibrate while I'm on the panel, on the dais, on the stage. Right after I ask him that question, I can see him on a big screen. He's looking back at us on Skype. He's looking down. He's got his baseball cap on, his scruffy beard, right? And all of a sudden, my phone buzzes, and it's Levin while I'm still on this panel. Literally, he's getting the next question from the next panelist, and he says, we need to talk. Call me as soon as you're done. And I think, I got him. Like, he's in. This is awesome. So I get off the panel. I immediately kind of dismiss myself, walk out to the foyer of the place where we're holding the event. I call him up, and he starts yelling at me. And I get the Levin tirade, right? Which you've heard on air.
Oh, yeah.
This is more harsh than what you've heard on air. How dare you? You had no right. Nobody knows what my book is about. I have no idea. I'm trying to get a word in. Mark, I don't know. And he's just yelling. And he finally stops. I'm like, Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, why did you ask me the question you asked me? And I said, because I'm starting the Convention of States project, and I was hoping it might be something you would be interested in. He said, I'm writing a book about Article 5 right now called the Liberty Amendments.
Wow.
And I said, Mark, you never talk about that stuff. And he said, there was a long silence, and he said, that's not a coincidence, that's providence. And he said, because I don't know how to do this. I know the idea is important. I think it's the most important idea I've ever come up with.
You didn't know how to execute.
But I'm a radio guy. He said, I'm a writer. I'm not an activist. The fact that, and he knew Mike Ferris too, the fact that you and Mike are doing this project, that's providence.
And that's all you had been doing, it's executing.
That's it.
So you're the perfect person.
Yeah. And Ferris too, he had all these homeschoolers all over the country. So we were a perfect pair to get this done. So I would say that is providential. So the book and the project launched the same week. Tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people ultimately come to the table. Here we are now 9 years later, this August. There are over 5.2 million people in the organization. We have activists and supporters in every single state legislative district in the country. It takes 34 states to call a convention of states. Now 19 states have done that. It's 4 states in the last 4 months. Wisconsin, Nebraska, West Virginia, and South Carolina. I'm looking at North Carolina here, hopefully in the next few weeks. We've passed the House in North Carolina. We're pending in the Senate. I think Pennsylvania looks pretty good this year. I think Ohio looks pretty good this year. Look, Mark, people are looking at Washington, D.C., and they're saying, that's a dumpster fire.
Yes, it is.
So we got to get the power away from those people and bring it back to the states.
So because we're running low on time, I want to finish with this. If I were a state legislator who was really skeptical about COS, Convention of States. And it's interesting, and I will say this for the listeners, I've had Republicans who are against this.
Absolutely.
And I've had obviously plenty of Democrats who are against this. And I were to sell them on why this is so important, or more importantly, what would it accomplish? What would your response be so that we can...
I'm going to make it as simple as I can, and if you want to do a little bit more detail, we can. There's an important fight we have to have in the United States right now, and it's not the fight we're having. The fight we're having tends to be around issues. How big should the federal healthcare system be, right? Or do we need federal gun control is one that we're having right now. And Washington, D.C. loves to have those fights because the underlying premise is always smart people, with air quotes, in D.C. will make those decisions for you, right? Because we have the power in D.C., we're going to make those decisions. The real fight in America should be who decides. And if you ask American people, who do you think should decide, Washington, D.C. or you, it really doesn't matter the party. They always say me. They don't say Washington, D.C. If you say, who should make your healthcare decisions, you and your doctor or Washington, D.C., they say me. If you say, who should make the decisions, Washington, D.C. or your local community? They always say my local community, right?
Always.
Because nobody trusts Washington, D.C. And so this is the fight. Who decides? And what Convention of States is a jurisdictional fight. What we're saying is we need to limit the scope, the power, and the jurisdiction of the federal government. We need to impose term limits on Congress and federal bureaucrats and staffers. and we need to make them balance their budget. We started with this, right? Live within their means. And so there are things that we can do that a convention can propose amendments to do those things. That's why we should do it. It doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. Doesn't matter whether you're in a blue state or a red state. You should want the power at home in your state, if you're a state legislator, whether you're Republican or Democrat, to exercise that power on behalf of your constituents, not to give it away to D.C.
Excellent. How about the big issue, the other big issue of just the federal government and fiscal responsibility? How do we return that to the states? Since the federal government is responsible for the Department of the Treasury and all this stuff, it's just, and this is really relevant now because our federal government has caused the inflation that we are living with.
Yes.
Because of spending.
Inflation and stagnation, right? Because of all the regulations. So I think this is a multi-layered problem. I mean, one of the things I don't want to do is tell everybody, oh, it's a silver bullet, it's easy to solve. It's not. But I think you need, number one, you need some form of balanced budget amendment. Can't spend more than you bring in.
Okay.
You need to couple that with taxing and spending caps.
Okay.
Otherwise, they just tax us to death. They keep spending and just raise taxes up, right? So although I think if you have a balanced budget amendment and they have to actually raise the taxes instead of print money, so another thing we should limit how much money they can print, right? Because that's just a hidden tax. Inflation is a hidden tax. And then to get to the root of the problem, in my opinion, is to remove authority from the federal government. Why do they spend so much money? Because they have the authority.
Because they can.
Right?
Yes.
So we need to say, no, you can't have a Department of Education. No, you can't have a Department of Energy or Environment or all these different departments that the federal government was never meant to have. And it's just common sense. And we're sitting here in Maryland. You guys have an environmental department. You guys have an education department.
Our environmental department is in charge here.
Okay, so you guys have all of that.
They run the state.
So the question is, then why is Maryland paying money to the federal government to have an EPA? And your your environment department here, I would probably guess, is stricter than the federal government.
It is.
So,
it is.
So why in God's name do we need to send money to the federal government? Right, we don't. And by the way, no state does. They all have their own departments of environmental quality, whatever they call them. And they do, whether we like them or not, they do a job closer to the people, right? So I would probably object to how this one runs. I would object to how it runs in California, where I was from before.
But at least I have a vote here.
We have a vote.
I don't have a vote for those bureaucrats in Washington.
And you could go talk to your legislators here and complain about what your Department of Environmental Quality is doing here. Washington, D.C., nobody's going to listen to you. So all that stuff needs to come home. If all that stuff comes home, they don't need all that money there. And then I would argue if there are funds coming to the states right now, just block grant it back to the states.
Perfect.
Let the states spend the money.
I love the block grant idea, believe me. So lastly, if someone wants to join or get involved in the Convention of States, how would they do that?
Go to conventionofstates.com. And I think this is really important. You click on sign the petition. That'll send it to guys like you. If they're in your district, it's going to send it to their state legislator, let them know that they're in support. It's important for you guys to know how many people in your district are in support.
It works too, by the way.
And we share that data with y'all. We want you to have the full data, name, address, everything, so that you know which of your constituents are in support. Number two, more important, click on the Take Action tab. It's not enough to send a petition. Don't just get angry and click on the button and fill in a few fields. Get involved. This is why the parent organization called Citizens for Self-Governance, we expect people to get involved and be in the fight. Here's what the founders and the framers expected of us. Not just to vote. Like, that was ridiculously low bar, right? It was that you would be informed and engaged, that you would participate. You're doing that. You are active in the state legislature. That's the highest level of engagement, frankly. But we need every citizen, all of your listeners, to be engaged. And there's a little bit of nuance. So you guys are in a blue state, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's a conservative cause in a blue state. It doesn't matter. We need everybody in the war. We passed out of 2 committees in Massachusetts this year.
That's incredible.
Right.
Congratulations.
Equally blue state.
Huge.
So the idea that it can't be done, I mean, look, you could say we couldn't have won a lawsuit against the IRS, right? So there's a lot of things people say can't be done. I believe in the American people. I believe in your listeners. You can do anything that you put your mind to, and you can do anything that you're willing to put your muscle into. That is our heritage as Americans. We are can-do people. We don't say, oh, the federal government's too big. There's nothing we can do. My state's too blue. There's nothing I can do. That's not the American ethos. The American ethos is, doesn't matter how tall the mountain is, how wide the ocean is, how hard the battle is. We as Americans, if we put our minds to it, our hearts to it, our shoulders to it, and I would add our prayer to it, if we turn to God and ask his favor, we can accomplish anything.
Mark Meckler, incredibly inspirational. I'm honored that you're here. Thank you for joining us here at Mark and the Millennials. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
God bless you. Thanks for doing it.
You got it. And thank you, everyone, for watching Mark and the Millennials. Please get involved in Convention of States. And thank you to our producer and all the other folks who were parts of the Convention of States. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.